There's no magic bullet in managing for waterfowl. It's to provide all the resources that those birds need throughout the wintering period. But you got to provide all the parts of the puzzle for him to stay all winter long.
Let's go back to the late 90s and early 2000s. We had just a few waterfowl managers that really understood wetlands management. And so really there was 3 or 4 people that were doing this. And then over time, there's been a group that's gone and got a lot more training on how we manage. And so one of the things that's new that we're doing since 2000 is managing our wildlife management areas in complexes. Just think about the Mississippi River Alluvial Valley and the Tennessee Valley. So we have a population of ducks that come down the Mississippi Valley. We have a population that comes down the Tennessee Valley. And so we've got multiple areas across those different river systems. And so early on what we had was we had them pretty scattered. Luckily we had a director, Gary Myers, that was there that really wanted to get into the land purchasing business to be able to provide for future generations. So he started putting these areas together and started doing connectivity from different WMA and different refuge system across there. So what that does now is provide more hunting opportunity. So we're managing these as complexes. And the reason we're doing this is to provide all the nutritional things that a duck needs throughout the season while they're here. It's our responsibility as hunters, it's our responsibility as agency personnel to help send these ducks back fat and in good body condition. We want to be able to send these ducks back to the nesting grounds to be able to lay a good hard egg and to be able to produce so that we get to hunt them next year and so that future generations continue to hunt them. Not only do state and federal partners do the same thing as far as waterfowl management, you've got many people in the private sector these days doing it.
Every morning during duck season, I have to get up and I have to face the crowd. That means I got to take our guests out with our guides, come back successful, and that innately pushes you every day to try to make the land better, to be more successful for these folks that are coming in, and those monies are gleaned to put it back into the resource. I mean, when you run a duck club for a 60-day season, and in 25 it'll be 20 years of every day the grind, watching those birds, how they utilize the different habitats. Well, you know, if we know these ducks need these resources, we can go to a book and read that. But watch them on weather events and watch them when they eat the hot foods and when they go to the moist soil. And I'll tell you, when it really, the blight bulb come on in November of 2006-07 duck season, had 40 acres of corn planted back here, some really good corn. George spent a lot of money on it. That was the most mild winter we've seen since some of the 80s. That was the poorest mallard harvest year we ever had on Five Oaks. But I say that to say, I said, look, you putting all your eggs in one basket. If you're going to grow all one crop on a duck club, you're going to fail. And so then we go flip 90 degrees and start going more moist soil, you know, more native weeds. It's because the ducks need that. You know, people say, they hire me, they say, where do I need to put my duck line? And I said, well, let's let the ducks tell us, and then we'll put it there. Yeah. Does that make sense? So if you're watching those birds day in and day out, and especially when we have older cohorts of birds, when we don't have a good hatch, put all corn out there and see what happens to you. They're going to beat you because they're smart. But so instead of seeing huge numbers of ducks on one field for a short window, I'm trying to keep ducks here from Halloween until they go home in March.
I'm a veterinarian. I live in Missouri. I'm the founder of Momarsh. So when you think about products like Invisalab, the Invisiman, the Final Stand, you know, those are all products that I developed back in the day. I'm also one of the original founders of Habitat Flats. It's an outfitting operation. We have a couple lodges in Missouri. We have a lodge up in Canada. We had a lodge in Kansas. We've hunted around quite a bit, but Tony is one of my partners there. He's our manager. And so we do a lot of planning, and he does a lot of work on trying to make sure that we're providing a good variety of proteins, carbs, whether it's in the way of invertebrates or seeds or shelter for the ducks. In my opinion, there's 3 things that a duck really needs. He needs water, he needs food, and he needs shelter. In our opinion, the best way to do that is by offering them a variety of different things which will benefit them. So early, we want them to have, invertebrates, shallow water. We use mowing as a technique to help to get that invertebrate bloom. We're doing that in our moist soil tracks.
Corn's not a bad thing. A hot crop's a good thing. It's just when the temperature changes. I'll give a good example. So I had somebody inquire with me back last year that said, hey, I want to know why Tennessee National, one of our great partners, is not knocking down more corn. They do this on the federal refuge over there. Not our refuge, but U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's refuge. And so I said, you know what? They don't have to knock any more corn down. I said, we've had no cold days. And I said, let's get in the truck and ride over there right now and take a look and see what's happening. Let's see where the ducks are today. They literally had at least 100 or more corn knocked down on the ground, had low water in it or shallow water where the ducks could get to the corn and feed. We did not see a duck in the corn that day. We were in 40s, 50s, I don't remember the exact temperature, but when we rode around there was a lot of ducks on the refuge, but they were all in the moist soil areas. There's no need to plant more corn, there's no need to knock more corn down. If the ducks aren't using it, then there's no need to be able to put more on the ground or have them in that type habitat. And so as these temperatures are no longer 25 degrees or colder for a lot of days during the season, it's more important now than ever that we provide this diversity. We have these areas of moist soil production, and we have aquatic invertebrates that are available for them.
One thing that we think about is when they get here, they've traveled, some of them over 1,000 miles in one flight without stopping. And when they get here, what we need to do for them is provide them the protein and the essential nutrients and all the things that they need to refuel from that migration so that they can prepare themselves for the cold, harsh winter if we're going to have one.
That after hunting season use may be the most important time for these WMAs. You've got overlapping life history things going on. The birds are paired up, they're going through a body feather molt, and they're also getting their energy to make that northern migration again. That time period is when they need moist soil plants and invertebrates more than ever.
Corn is a hot crop. It is strictly a carbohydrate. It's no different than if a human chose to live their life off of bread. It's just not enough to survive.
Every single duck needs different things every different day. And the good Lord had put it in their DNA to know what to search for to be successfully healthy and to pair and then to breed and have more. And that means they need shrub. They need hot foods like your rice, corn, milo, millet, small grains. They need moist soil. They need forested wetlands like our green tree reservoirs and our native river bottom. Listen, all of those things are good. In one of those things in everything that you got on the farm is bad.
Ducks love corn for a couple reasons. One, it's a high carb, big ticket item when it comes, when things get tough and it's cold, they'll eat it if they can get to it. And then it's also really good roosting cover. So they love to be in corn at night. They're safe. It's warm relatively. That plant helps to insulate the water some, and they have good protection from above. Corn has its place and time, but corn also, if you want to make your ducks nocturnal, plant a bunch of corn. And you'll see those patterns change. The more flooded corn you have and the more utilization of that and access to that they have, the more they're not going to do other things. The less they're going to use your hunting areas during the day, the less they're going to dry field. But having said that, there is value to corn, and we do manage some places and some stuff for corn.
People ask a question, why not wall-to-wall corn? One of the things that you've probably seen in places that we plant corn is once the corn's gone, the ducks are gone. If we go in and we plant wall-to-wall corn, ducks start coming into those areas after 3 o'clock in the evenings and they're feeding hard on that corn. 50,000 ducks can wipe out a lot of corn overnight. And then what happens? They quit coming back to that area altogether. Moist soil production is much different. There's several different things that ducks use in a moist soil management unit. They're going to eat the seeds that are provided there, they're going to eat a lot of aquatic invertebrates, but these provide a lot of nutritional value to the duck. We can send the duck back in better body condition, and the good thing is they keep coming back to these units all throughout the season.
all sorts of new technologies that are becoming available to help us learn more details about some of the things that we've studied sort of in captive situations and so forth. But now we can study it out in the wild. Metabarcoding, taking fecal samples and running that through some genetic analysis to identify what these birds are eating on your property. Talk about some of that. Y'all are starting to do that here with some of your researchers, some of your director of the 5 Oak Research Center. And what are y'all learning?
A lot. So, you know, if a duck eat it and he likes it and it's very frequent in his diet, don't you think you ought to manage for it?
I would think so.
Okay, well, we didn't get much corn because we don't raise a lot of corn. But of these samples that the guys take, Dr. Ashton's looking at this data, and, you know, I'm learning after 30 years of managing ducks, you know, we always knew they ate chufa, right?
Yep.
But they eat the yellow nutsaid seeds too, and they're at high frequency in their diet. So instead of me putting permit out in the edge of the rice field and killing it, we're growing it. And so, you know, broadleaf signal grass, we knew they loved the smart weeds. I still don't know why, as hard as those seeds are. It may be something to do with the grit, you know.
Use it as a source of grit.
Grit,
Some speculation that that's how they're using it.
But they love it. And whatever bugs are associated with it, they definitely love that. We do a lot of different cultural practices, whether it be cleated rolling, fall mowing, fall disking, to increase populations of invertebrates. We really want to focus on the next 5 years, maybe really studying more about those underwater critters and how we can do management practices to increase them, whether it be in the forest or whether it be in moist soil. But man, just to see that every duck, just about, the majority of the ducks that were shot, healthy woods means healthy mallards means dead mallards, okay, at 5 Oaks Duck Lodge.
And that's what turns the crank here. Yeah. Make no mistake about that, right?
It is. I did over in Irby Woods in Mississippi one time. We looked at, we did about 5 years where me and Rob Stockett would go in and say, we had a good crop of acorns, a bad crop of acorns, or a jam up acorns. Well, if you look at duck harvest against those, the poor years was poor kill on mallards. The highest of the yield of the acorns, the highest the yield of the harvest. So I'm like, let's feed the trees, let's do thinning, let's do whatever we can to promote better habitat conditions in the forest. Just like in a ag field, we're going to do everything we can to make more acorns and more habitat available for the ducks at the right depth at the right time. You know, it all lines up. Yeah. And I wish we could educate people in that, because it's not rocket science. It's do what the duck wants to do instead of what the hunter wants to do.
Really, one of the things that we have been tasked with is farming in areas where we really shouldn't be farming. So, and here's what I mean by that. We're actually farming in the annual floodplain. One interesting thing about Kentucky Lake is, if you think about where we're farming, we're actually below the level of the lake. So think about that, trying to put a crop below the level of the lake, because that's what we're doing. So really, we probably shouldn't be farming in that area, but hey, we own what we own, so we're trying to make the best use of that. Now move over to the Obion River system. Again, what we're doing, we're farming in the annual floodplain. So what does that mean? That means that area overbank floods every year annually. And what's happening that's a big factor to our management is, and why we're shifting more to moist soils, is they can tolerate water for longer periods of time. And so what we're seeing, and we are seeing over time and have seen over time, is we're getting longer floods. So the duration of the flood lasts longer, the flood frequency is more often. And so just this year alone, you all probably know, we received several big rains in July, several big rains in August. Well, you might say, well, hey, these rains aren't normal. We had as much as 14 inches around the Union City area. Well, what we've seen is, historically, we can look at data over time, and yes, they are becoming more frequent. So what happens when you're farming at a very low elevation, and you get a rain event many times now that's 2 inches or greater? We'll lose a big portion of the crops that we plant. Now, our moist soil plants can survive that better. So what we're doing, we're getting in the lowest elevations and planting moist soils, and we're trying to get up to higher elevations and plant things like hot crops such as corn. So recently this year, I've been asked, people will go down a road and they'll say, well, on that side of the road where the WMA is, your crops look terrible. On this side of the road, the crops look great. Well, that is maybe as much as 5, even 10 feet in elevation change. And so as you think about these rivers overbank flooding, and you think about the Kentucky Lake units, you think about the river elevations, think about when that water gets in there and where that water starts to rise. And so we're trying to take and put crops where they belong, whether that be moist soils, whether that be Japanese millet, or whether that be corn.
You know, I have grown up in this area, started duck hunting West Sandy in around the early 90s, 92, 93 as a young child, and a lot of the issues we have now with flooding aren't necessarily driven by climate or the amount of rain we're getting. A lot of these WMAs, they're silting in like every other wetland in the southeast. We have sediment loads that are pouring down into our river systems, and they're carrying a lot of sand, a lot of silt, and what that does is it just fills it in. So, you know, we have an elevation X in 1995. Well, that elevation may be up here in 2023. And so when we get the same amount of rainfall, it acts differently on the landscape. And that's why we're seeing a lot more prone to flooding.
We're trying to put resources on the ground for you all as hunters. The agency, just in planting crops and pumping alone, is spending over $1 million on waterfowl management. Doesn't include staff time or a lot of the other resources. That's just $1 million. And you say, well, you know, we started asking ourselves, how does that compare to other states? Well, most of the states in the southeast, most of the states that touch Tennessee are not planting anything, or they're planting very little corn. And you may say, well, why is that the case? Well, what we found is over time things have changed. And so a lot of private clubs are planting corn. And so a lot of these agencies are going to more moist soil management. That way they're getting that diversity that we're talking about.
People say, I want this field to be corn this year. Well, it stands in water till about June. It has poor drainage. They plant it, it drowns out. They plant it, it drowns out. Well, do you think that's a good place to plant corn?
Probably not.
Okay. So the other guy says, I want this to be moist soil, and it's a clayey, but it's a very drouthy clayey soil. It doesn't hold water very well, and it doesn't grow any weeds. Do you think that's a good place to grow moist soil? Probably not. My point is that you, in the way the rotations work is, we identify by June 1 if that's a good moist soil plot in the field or a bad one. Or if we know we have invasive plants from the previous year, we're going to use corn, rice, milo, whatever the chemistry to clean it up to get rid of the invasive plant. So ag plays an incredibly major part of managing the holistic rest areas or the holistic property. I tell people every day that I'm consulting, if you do the same thing every year, you will fail. So what does that mean? That means if I grow corn in my duck pond, my yields are going down. Okay, why do you think we have crop rotations in agronomy and in agriculture? Because the soil won't take that.
Another problem with the corn crop, when it floods out, it puts managers in a bind. We have to treat that field differently because of the time of year that it may flood out. Replant corn's usually not an option either from an economic standpoint or a timing. We fall back on planting millet a lot. What we've seen more than anything here lately is armyworm damage. The time that planted millet crop is coming off is when we're getting invaded by armyworms, and that planted millet is just not as hardy as the moist soil. One, it's younger, it's tender, that's what the armyworms are looking for, and we see very little damage, armyworm damage in moist soil here.
Yeah, now I like to tell hunters a lot of time when we get in this conversation is, I can guarantee you a crop by doing nothing. Maybe a little bit of fertilizer, maybe a little bit of herbicide if needed. I can guarantee you a crop at those low elevations. Or we can roll the dice, we can go plant the corn, and we know that in some areas, 9 out of 10 years, we're losing that corn crop, and then you have nothing. If it's at the right time, you end up with nothing.
Corn is a tool that we utilize, but you know, it's got to be levee protected or else you run a big risk of a flood and it all dying, which we had a bunch of that. You know, we were in a drought this year. We had a big flood in August, and we lost, on just our personal tracks, we lost about 80% of our corn. So if I could have a do-over, I would have gone with no corn and all moist soil because, when you get into August, you're running short on days here. And if your corn dies and you don't have enough time for things to start growing again and head out, then you end up with basically nothing there. I'm a big proponent of moist soil. I personally really like smartweed because it lasts a long time. Those ducks, when it gets late in the year and they've gotten all the easy stuff, as you continue to bring those water levels up, they'll start running through that smartweed even when it doesn't really have hardly any water on it, because they figure out that they can run through there and flap their wings and stuff, and the seeds fall off the plant that are still on the plant, and then they can go out there and eat those seeds that have been, been protected because they've been on the plant and they haven't been able to eat. So it lasts a long time. It also gives them some good, vertical cover to hide from predators and stay out of the sun some.
One of the things that we get from a lot of our hunters is, I've hunted this area all my life. Why aren't you doing what you used to do? Well, our managers are actually farming these areas 365 days a year. So duck hunting is not just 60 days for our managers. They're out there on the landscape all year long. And we do more work in the off season than we do in the in season. What I mean is, throughout the whole year, we're tearing out beaver dams, we're trying to get water moving, water flowing, we're trying to hold water, we're trying to manipulate water levels, we're doing slow drawdowns to try to promote these moist soils. So what we get to see in the process of doing that is really how this landscape changes. So you know what, even our managers that have only been on the ground maybe 5-10 years compared to somebody that's lived in an area, hunted there for 30 years, they really get to see what's changing. A lot of these areas are silting in, and they have over time because of the way the river systems are. And that really changes how you can get water off and how you can get water on these areas. And that in turn affects what we can grow there.
And when you manage for a diversity of wetland types across this landscape, you're not only managing for mallards, right? You're making you're creating a wetland complex that supports what? Diversity of species?
Diversity of species, although we're mallard hunters, but we provide for all species, especially on Benson Lake here behind the lodge. It's 4 green tree reservoirs and kind of a 5th one. But all the open land, all the resources for rest. Although that's another major component of how I work on these properties, is that if you're not willing to rest, unless you're right next door to a refuge, if you're not willing to give the ducks a break in these days, you fail.
We establish our own refuge areas as well, because having places where they're undisturbed, if you can create flight lines there where they're going from one safe spot to another safe spot, and you got food here and there and traffic areas, it's just a way that you can keep those ducks fresher and have success for a longer period of time. But also, it's not all just about the hunting success, how many days you kill, how many ducks. It's also, about conservation.
Also with these WMAs, they're wildlife management areas. It's not just about waterfowl to us. We manage all wildlife species. That could be managing these WMAs for providing nesting cover and brood rearing cover for wild turkeys, cover for white-tailed deer, fawn rearing, small game species, quail. Just the whole plethora of both game and non-game species. And in doing that, we can't create just a monoculture. If we choose to make a monoculture of one thing over the other, then we're not doing our due diligence as wildlife managers in managing for wildlife.